Broader economic issues now. The medium-term budget policy statement will be presented by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana on Wednesday. A lot is riding on this mid-term budget, with Eskom's debt, a high unemployment rate and millions of workers battling with the cost of living. We're joined now by Cosatu, Sizwe, Pamla to find out what they're expecting to hear from government. A very good morning to you, Mr. Pamla, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. And it is a tough balancing act that the minister is going to have to handle. While we're not necessarily going to get allocations from the minister, he will be painting a picture of what is set to come in the national budget that will be presented in February. So when you are talking as Cosatu and related stakeholders, what direction do you anticipate the minister to take as he tables the midterm budget policy statement?
Well, look, we are hoping that the minister is going to present a people-centered budget. Is going to move away from this the austerity framework that has been in place since 2014. The reality is, since 2014, South African government has been arguing that South Africa's biggest challenge is the national debt. We disagree with that. South Africa's biggest challenge is economic stagnation. If you don't address the economic stagnation, you cannot address national debt. So we are hoping that they are going to move away and they are going to try and come out with policy interventions that are meant to resuscitate the economy. Because so far, the budget cuts and the austerity framework has really been suffocating the economy. If you look at the state of our municipalities, for an example, those municipalities are imploding, and we need a turnaround strategy. So far, we have heard nothing from COCTA. And you look at the SOEs themselves. For the last 2 years, I think we've had an SOE council, and we're hoping that that SOE council has been working on some turnaround plans, especially the issues of funding model, because many of these SOEs are really dependent on state for their survival. So we are hoping that we will get a sense of how they are going to be funded going forward and how they are going to be fixed. But also, if you look at the ongoing public service wage negotiations, we cannot afford to have a national strike. So we hope that the orientation of this upcoming midterm budget policy statement will be the one that is trying to solve the problems, and there are many of them.
And I wanted to touch base on that national wage negotiation that is currently underway. And government, as you say, for years now has indicated that it has to rein in the budget because one of its biggest costs is the wages that it pays to government employees. As Cosatu, and bearing in mind the current state of the economy, what realistic expectation are you trying to present to the employer in terms of this is what workers would like, bearing in mind what we're seeing in the economy?
Well, look, we do have a media briefing on Monday where our unions will outline the way forward in regards to the negotiations at the PSC. But as a federation, what we would like to see is a situation where government appreciates the sacrifices these workers have made. Mm-hmm. For an example, these workers were cheated out of their money in the year 2020, the third leg of Resolution 1 of 2018. For the last 2 years, they haven't received an increase. They've been paid a 1,000 rand stipend. Mm-hmm. That 1,000 rand stipend does not impact on the baseline, because what it means is that their pensions have been declining. They've been eroded by the wage freeze of the last 2 years. Now, the issue of the wage bill is really a big problem, because we hear this issue that the wage bill is a problem. No, the economy of South Africa is a problem. The economy is a problem because if you have 44% unemployment, if you have 26 people on welfare, at the same time, all you ever do is to give corporate cuts to the private sector. It means you don't know what you are doing, because you are putting money into the pockets of the private sector. From 2012, we were sitting at 34% corporate tax. Today, it's 27%. And what do they do with this money? 85 billion of it is taken out of this economy every year. Now, if you can afford to give so much money to the private sector, then you can't deny a public servant the money that they deserve, especially because they are carrying this nation on their backs. If you look at the South African Police Service, for an example, in 2000, the year 2000, we had a population of 44 million, and we had 200,000 police officers. Today, we have a population of 58 million. We have 172,000 police officers. So we have seen a decline in the numbers of police officers. And we expect these people to be able to carry the police-to-citizen ratio out there on the streets. So the reality is, the people who work in the public service are really overwhelmed by the lack of numbers, by also the enormity of the problems in the health sector, in the security sector, in the education sector. So the conversation here is unfair to these workers because no one talks about the fact that this government, instead of collecting a tax from the corporate sector, has been handing over money to the corporate sector.
And that's what I wanted to get into now is taxes. And there's been a lot of debate about taxes and their increase so that a basic grant can be introduced into society. And I just want to get Cosatu's thoughts on that in terms of we want to introduce a basic income grant as a standard in the country. And the problem here is the finances are not necessarily readily available. So there are talks around increasing taxes on various platforms. Where do you stand on this debate and where do you think the money should be coming from? Should it be taxes? You've just spoken about corporate taxes, or are there other funding models that you've considered as a union?
No, the point I just made about the corporate tax, because if you have reduced the tax in a decade from 34 to 27%, some people will argue that actually the corporate sector is on welfare, which means you are running a corporate welfare state. So how is it that corporations are on welfare in this country and yet you are having these conversations about putting the unemployed on welfare and making sure that they actually get some stipend that can allow them to have 3 meals a day? No, if government is so generous to corporations, then government has to find that money. If they say they can't afford it, then they must go and adjust the corporate tax and at least adjust it back to 28% so that we can get back that money that the corporations have used to actually destroy jobs. Because that's another problem that we have. The reason why we have so many people on welfare is because these tax incentives that has been given to the private sector, they've only ever used them to mechanize, to automate, and to outsource, to take jobs out of the country. So the fact that we have 44 million people unemployed, and yet you keep giving tax incentives and saying that the private sector is going to help you create jobs, then someone has got to look after these people who are being sent onto the unemployment line. So that's why we're saying that, no, the money is there. It's just being given to a particular sector. So if you run a corporate welfare state, then you will find it difficult to argue against actually giving people some kind of a stipend that will allow them to achieve it.
Yeah, very important conversation there, Sizwe, Pamla, and I'm sure we'll catch up in the next coming days as we lead up to that medium-term budget policy statement. Thank you very much for joining us, Cosatu, Sizwe, Pamla. Cosatu's expectations ahead of that budget policy statement.